Hey guys, what we did in the last video was we created the form that allows us to add a new bill. But what we did not do is we did not create the function, we did not hook up the real function for updating our bills. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to create our context, which is going to be our centralized state for the application. And in there, we're going to go ahead and create the functionality for storing our bills, getting our bills out of storage, updating our bills, etc. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so let's dig right in. So the first thing you want to do is just make sure that you have your terminal open or your CLI in general, and you go to your project directory and you run npm start so your local server is running. And you'll probably see that you have this warning here that says use context is defined but never used inside of add bill. Perfectly fine. We're going to be using that shortly, so that will go away. It's fine to go ahead and have that for now. So I'm opening up my add bill component, and I just want to point out a few things. Again, we have use context here. We're going to be creating our context in just a second to use in here. And we are going to be getting rid of our update bills function here, and we're going to be creating an update bills function inside of our context that we replace this with. So let's go over to our context folder, and I want to create a new file. We'll call it billcontext.js. Now, context you can kind of think of as a React component that houses all of the state for either your entire app or just a section of your app. But any child component of this context will have access to the value that you provide through the provider. Now that doesn't make much sense if you've never used context before, but we're going to go ahead and dive in and I will explain it as we go. So we're going to start with an import. We're going to import React, and we're going to import use state, create context, and use effect, all from React. You should be familiar with use state and use effect by now because we've talked about it in the previous videos in this tutorial series. And create context is just going to be a function that creates our context. So we can say bill context, const bill context is equal to create context. And this is going to create our context that we're going to create a provider from. So with that being said, we need to create a provider. If I can spell. And it's going to be a function. And in here, we're going to return some JSX. And basically, we're going to destructure children out of the props. So the children, if you're not familiar with children in React, I'm going to create a fake component here. Let's just pretend that I'm inside of an HTML JSX file and I'm using components. And inside of here, I just throw in a div, and then I've got component 1, and then underneath this, I've got component 2, and inside of here, I've got component 3. All of these are children of component. So if this was, for instance, bill provider, these would all be this variable that we're destructuring out right here. So it doesn't matter. So with that being said, when I pass the context down, the value through the provider, even though that this is a direct child of comp2, it will still have access to the context because it doesn't matter how deeply nested these components are. As long as it's a child of this, it will have access to it. So we're going to destructure out children here. And inside of here, we're going to want some state. So I'm going to create a const variable, and we're going to destructure out from state. We're going to say we want bills and set bills, and we're going to create our state, and we're going to initialize it as an empty array because we want an array of bills. Okay, and we're actually going to expose bills here, and we're not going to expose set bills to our children. Instead, we're going to create a wrapper called update bills, which adds a little bit of extra functionality, and I'll show you what I mean by that. Let's say update bills. Don't worry, we're not going to create this function quite yet, but let's just say update bills takes a bill, and we're going to do like thing 1, thing 2, and then we're going to set bills. So by exposing this instead of this, it abstracts it a little bit so that this component right here where we're using update bills doesn't have to know everything about the state. That makes sense, okay? So what do we need to return? Well, we need to return a provider tag. So what does that look like? Well, we have our context, and we can say bill context.provider. And inside of here, we want to put children. And so basically what we're saying is we're going to return a component that takes the children, throws them inside of a bill context.provider tag, and then inside of this bill context.provider, we can add a prop called value. And this is where we're gonna give and send down our state. So in here, I'm gonna put our bills. Again, we're not gonna put set bills, instead we're gonna put update bills. So here we're passing bills and update bills to all of our children. And we need to export, we need to actually export both our context, bill context, and our bill provider. Okay, so inside of our update bills, for now, I just want to literally log the bill. Whoops, and I'm gonna save this. And I wanna come into my add bill component here, and I wanna just remove this completely. So we're still using it down here, but I removed the fake one, and we're gonna go ahead and use context here to grab the one that we created here inside of our bill context. So just down here, we'll say const, and then update bills. We'll destructure that out of use context. And the context that we want to provide is bill context. And that automatically imported for me here. If that didn't automatically import for you, go ahead and write this line. You want to make sure you're importing your bill context. So I'm saying, let's use context, bill context. And from this context, I want to grab update bills. And so we're destructuring out update bills from this value object here. So we're grabbing that. We have access to it now. And so when I save this, let's see what happens, okay? We should get an error. Let me go ahead and take a look. It looks like I need to do this. Cool. So we do, in fact, get an error. Now, why is that? What is it saying? It says cannot read property update bills of undefined. So what does that mean exactly? Well, it's saying that update bills here, it's saying that this is undefined. It's saying it's trying to grab update bills, but it can't because whatever you're trying to grab it from is undefined. So why would this be undefined? Well, if you remember, I mentioned that you have to wrap any component that you want to use this context in with a provider tag. So we need to do that. Let's go to our app, and inside of app.js, we need to wrap our add bill component inside of our provider. So I'm going to say bill provider, and we need to add our child, add bill. So now add bill is a child of bill provider and should have access to our state. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to refresh, and you can see we do not get the error anymore. So I'm going to go back to my add bill component, and you can see our update bills function now expects us to pass a bill to it. So inside of add bill, I need to go down to where we're calling update bills, which is right here, and I need to actually pass the bill object to it. There's two items that we want to throw inside of this object. We want to have a title, and we can set that to new bill title, which is our state right here. We created this state, and we want to also throw in our monthly cost, which would be new bill cost. Again, it's a piece of state that we created. Remember, those are tied to our inputs here. So let's see what happens when I try to submit this. I'm going to put Hulu, and I'm going to put 9.99. And when I click add bill, you can see it actually logs it from bill context. So you know it's working as expected. That's great. But what we want to do is we want to actually add the bill to our local storage and update our list. So in order to do that, we're going to do all of that stuff inside of our update bills function inside of our bill context file. Now, remember I said that we were going to be using the local storage in order to store our bills. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, when we first load up the application and our context is loaded and initialized, the very first thing that we want to do is check local storage, grab any of the bills that we might have stored, and display them. Now, if there aren't any bills stored, we can assume that we can just create an empty array, okay? because we know that there's no bills. So how do we do that when the app first boots up with our context? Well, that's where useEffect comes in. If you remember, I demonstrated that in a previous video in this tutorial series. So we're going to use effect. And because inside of this useEffect, we're going to call setBills. We're going to call setBills with either an empty array or whatever's in local storage. We need to depend on that. Remember that dependency array I was talking about. Now there's two things we can do here. We can either not provide a dependency array at all, and the problem with that is every single time any value changes or whenever this re-renders, this function is going to be run, which is not very efficient. We don't want to do that. Instead, what we want to do is just simply depend on our setBills function. So setBills, let's create our array, setBills, put our setBills inside of our array here, and that will allow us to use setBills inside of this function. Now setBills itself is a function that should never change, so it should only run once, very similar to component did mount. So inside of here we can say setBills. Now remember, this function is going to run when our context initializes. So what we want to do is check inside of our local storage and say json.parse. We want to say json.parse because in local storage we can only store strings, and so when we store our array in there, we're actually going to convert it to a string before we store it in local storage. So when we pull it out, we need to use json.parse to convert it from a string back to an object. So the name of the item that we're going to get from local storage, so get item, is going to be, we'll call it port exe bills. And what we want to say is if this exists, we want to go ahead and set bills with that data, or if that doesn't exist, we want to use an empty array. So this is called short circuiting. If this comes back and is undefined, null, or any type of falsy value, such as an empty string, then it's going to give us an empty array. Otherwise, it will just give us this. So we're setting bills with either an empty array or whatever we have in local storage. Cool, so I'm gonna save this, and I want to actually log bills each time bills changes for now. So I'm gonna create another effect. We can have multiple. And this one is gonna rely solely on bills. Whenever bills changes, this right here, whenever this changes, that value, we want to log it. So I'm gonna save it and come over here, and you can see that I have an item inside of here by default. I refresh it, you see it's there, and that's because I already had an item in local storage. So I can go to my application here, right click and clear my local storage completely, go back to my console over here, let's just come over here and refresh, and you can see it's an empty array now. And that's because I don't have anything in local storage for this app. So that is good. So what are we going to do with update bills in order to actually grab the bill that we submitted and add it to our list of bills, submit it to local storage, and then set our state? That's easy. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and say const update bills, updated bills, updated, and we're going to set that equal to an array. And what that array is going to contain is all the bills we currently have in state. So that's the spread operator. It's saying all of the bills we currently have in state, comma, the current bill that we passed right here. So all the bills we currently have plus the additional bill that we're passing right there. After we have this variable updated bills, we want to go ahead and set our local storage. So local storage.set item. The key is port exe bills. So I'm going to copy this and put this here. And the value for that is going to be updated bills, but remember json.stringify, because we can only store strings in local storage. So updated bills. And then under this, we want to go ahead, after we store this item in local storage, let's go ahead and set state. So we'll say set bills, and we will go ahead and call that with updated bills. So effectively what we're doing is we're exposing this wrapper here to our children, update bills, which takes the bill that we pass to it, adds it to our list of bills, updates our local storage, and then updates our state. And then we should see it get logged because bills gets updated. So I'm going to save, and I'm going to come over here. You can see I don't have anything in local storage, so we have an empty array. And I'll come over here and I'll say Hulu. We'll put 999. I'm gonna click add bill. And now you can see that we have an array here with Hulu in it. I'm gonna add one more. I'm just gonna say Netflix. We'll say 999, click add bill. And now we have 2 items in there, Hulu and Netflix. And I'm gonna refresh. And you can see now they're still here. So the app is initialized with Hulu and Netflix already in our local storage. Awesome. Cool. So that being said, I think in the next video, what we're gonna do is we're gonna create our list. So our bill list component, which is gonna display the list of all of our bills along with possibly the bill total. And that is gonna be adding a little bit to our bill context and also creating a new component. So thank you very much. Hey guys, if you liked this video, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.